In last week's video, you watched me travel to the Big Island to photograph the Pueo, or the Hawaiian short-eared owl. I wanted to get more into wildlife photography, so no better way than to rent the 600mm G Master to pair with my Sony A1 to capture these beautiful creatures. In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience using this beast of a lens, what I liked, what I didn't like, and my overall experience utilizing this insane wildlife combination. Now, in these talking head shots, I'm only using the A1 and my 100-400 because my experience with the 600mm G Master was back in April, and it is now mid-September or towards the end of September. So obviously I had to return the lens. So hopefully I have enough B-roll from April to kind of overlay this footage. We'll start off with the good things. The focal length of 600mm is probably the best focal length for wildlife photography. It's tight enough that you can get birds that are far away, you can get nice detail if the birds are a little bit closer, but it's not super tight that you can't reframe when you're trying to chase birds around and they're flying around, they're going all over the place. It's very balanced, I would say. It gets you as far as you need to be so that you can frame your shot, capture it beautifully, and at the same time track your subjects. In fact, I'm shooting this bird right now, and this thing is literally like 15 feet away with the 100-400, not in crop mode. It's a very nice shot, but the birds are literally right in front of me. Now, on my trip to photograph the Pueo, I actually ended up cropping in my photos a lot more because the birds were so far away. Even though it looked like I have a lot of detail, and I do have a lot of detail because I'm shooting with the 50 megapixels of the A1, it allows me that versatility to crop in. I don't think I would have been able to pull off the same shots that I did on that trip with the 100-400. I would have definitely needed something just a little bit more telephoto, like a 600mm. Now, the thing that separates the G Master lens versus other 600mm lenses is the aperture. That f4 aperture definitely came in clutch. The depth of field that I achieved with that f4 aperture is insane. The quality of the images look like they came out of something that a National Geographic photographer would obtain. And that just made me feel so much better and so much more legit than I actually am as a wildlife photographer, which, to be honest, I'm like fairly brand new at. When using a super telephoto lens like this, it's important to have as much stabilization as you can. Now, the Sony A1, of course, has pretty decent in-body image stabilization, or IBIS, but the benefit of using the 600mm G Master is that it also has Sony's OSS, or optical steady shot. So combining those two was really helpful when shooting at that super telephoto range. Having that stabilization actually worked very well. I was able to get some pretty decent handheld video out of the 600mm, as well as, of course, obtain super tack sharp wildlife shots when handheld. Now, when it comes to sharpness, of course, having it be a G Master lens, the 600mm GM is going to be super tack sharp. All G Master lenses across the lineup are going to be tack sharp. They just always add extra crispiness to the image. And pairing that sharpness with the Sony's animal bird eye autofocus system definitely aided in making sure that all of my shots were super tack sharp. Speaking of autofocus, this lens performed exactly how I would expect it to perform, which is super well. I don't think I ever missed a shot because the autofocus missed. I think most of my missed shots were from me not really being in the right position, not being quick enough. So user error, pretty much. This lens paired with the Sony A1, when put in the right situation, in the right lighting, it's always going to perform very well. Alright, so clearly the 600mm G Master is the best lens for wildlife photography. So, Spencer, why don't you have one? Well, this is where we get into the cons. So, the reason I don't have one is the price tag, and This lens comes at the hefty price tag of $13,000 brand new. And if you're anything like me, $13,000 does not come easy. Now, you might be able to find one on eBay for like $10,000 to $11,000, but still, that is like 6 times the amount of just getting one of the Sony 200 to 600 millimeter lenses that pretty much give you the same focal length of 600 millimeter. You just don't get that f4 aperture. So it's really hard to justify for most people. So for that reason, I ended up opting to rent this lens for this project instead of actually buy it with my own money, which ended up working out for me because I ended up paying about $450-ish for like a 5-day rental, which is, don't get me wrong, still a very expensive rental, but it's a lot cheaper than $13,000. If I ever needed to get another lens for wildlife photography, let's say I have a dedicated wildlife photography assignment or another creative passion that I wanted to pursue, I could always rent it again for another $450, and I still would be well below that $13,000 price tag that I would be paying if I were to purchase it out of my pocket. Another thing that I disliked about the lens was the size and the weight. Now granted, the 600 millimeter G Master is, I think, the lightest 600 millimeter f4 lens out of all the different camera brands. If I pull up the numbers right here, the Sony version is 6.7 pounds. The Canon RF lens comes in close at 6.8 pounds. The next closest lens is the Nikon Z lens at 7.18 pounds. And when we go into DSLR lenses, the Nikon F lens is 8.4 pounds. And taking the crown as the heaviest 600 millimeter f4 lens is the Canon EF lens. Comes in at a whopping 11.8 pounds. So if you are indeed looking for the lightest possible 600 millimeter f4 setup, this setup is definitely for you, as long as you have the money for it. But still, at 6.7 pounds, this is still not the lens that I would pick to handhold something for a long period of time. This is definitely a lens that you would want to put on a tripod when shooting wildlife and kind of just sit out and hang out and just kind of, you know, snipe the birds out. Like, this would be a good spot to set up the 600 millimeter G Master. And I did, after I came back from the trip, I actually took I took the lens out for one morning here and got some pretty decent shots out of it. But for most of my type of wildlife photography, which is very run and gun, hopping from location to location, hopping in and out of the car to drive up and down the road to try and chase the owls around the road, it's not the most conducive lens for that because of how heavy and how bulky it is. I would definitely not recommend it for somebody who's more of the run and gun type of shooter like I am. Now, this lens is obviously not the smallest lens either. I definitely could not fit it in my camera bag, and I actually had to carry it in a separate carrying case in order to carry it on the plane. And because of that portability issue, I ended up having to switch up my camera bag setup. And instead of using my usual Shimoda setup, I used my Wandered because it was just a little bit easier to carry around the laptop, especially when traveling. And I knew I wouldn't be doing any long distance hiking on this trip, so that's the reason why I had to switch up the camera bag, was because I was literally carrying a whole separate setup. I didn't have my usual suitcase with the laptop sleeve that I could use. But those are literally the only 2 complaints that I have about this lens, is the price tag and the size and weight. If you're a professional sports photographer or a wildlife photographer that does wildlife photography for a living and can justify the insane price tag, this lens is perfect for you and you will not be disappointed. It has the prime focal length of 600 millimeters paired with the shallow depth of field aperture of f4. When paired with a dedicated wildlife photography camera like the Sony A1 or the Sony A9, it performs flawlessly with super good stabilization, beautiful image quality, and super crispy sharpness, as well as insanely good autofocus performance. All I had to do was point my camera at the subject and it would nail focus on the eye every single time. But if you're just the hobbyist or wildlife photography enthusiast like I am, you're probably better off suited for renting this lens if you have a dedicated project to work on, or purchasing a lens like this, the 100 to 400 G Master or the 200 to 600 G Master to use, and saving that money for more important things like, you know, paying the bills, traveling, just, you know, save your money because it definitely costs a fortune. So yeah, I think that's gonna about wrap up this video. Just a quick little gear review for you guys today. We'll get back to the usual travel videos next week, but yeah, make sure you hit that like button, comment below, leave me a comment on your thoughts about the 600mm G Master. Are you gonna get one? Are you balling? Are you gonna get me one for your Christmas gifts? I don't know. Should I bite the bullet and just buy one and go into insane amounts of credit card debt? I don't know. Probably not. But yeah, hit that like button, comment below, subscribe if you aren't ready, and we'll see you guys next week. Peace out.